Today we're taking a look at the 2023 Emissions Gap report by the United Nations Environmental Programme. The UN's annual report identifies the gap between current emissions commitments and the reductions we need to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees C. But the report's findings are alarming. Last year was the hottest on record. Emissions are still rising, and our current efforts are falling far short. Let's dive into it. Despite the growing awareness of the need to transition to clean energy sources, investments in fossil fuel extraction and use persist in many regions across the globe. Furthermore, greenhouse gas emissions continue to rise, exacerbating the issue of climate change. Energy generation still remains the primary source of emissions, accounting for 86% globally. Decarbonization commitments are being made, but they're not nearly enough. Overall, some commitment progress has been made since the adoption of the Paris Agreement, but recent progress has been limited. We also still need far more coverage. The UN report highlights that only 37% of global GHG emissions are currently covered by net zero targets for 2050 or earlier. Even if all commitments were followed, we'd still fall far short of 1.5 degrees C. This gap between the commitments we have and the commitments we need is what is referred to as the emissions gap. By 2030, existing commitments are expected to reduce global emissions by 11% compared to current policy projections. However, to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees C, we need to reduce global GHG emissions by 42%. If we continue with current policies, global warming is estimated to reach a frightening 3 degrees Celsius. These findings emphasize the need for immediate and unprecedented mitigation action in this decade. The report also points out the enormous global inequality in emissions. The data reveals that the top 10% of the global population with the highest income is responsible for nearly half, 48%, of total emissions. In stark contrast, the bottom 50% of the world population contributes a mere 12% of the emissions. Furthermore, when considering historical cumulative emissions, nearly 80% can be attributed to the G20 countries. Among them, China, the United States of America, and the European Union being amongst the highest emitters. In contrast, the least developed countries account for only 4% of this cumulative total. Addressing this global inequality in emissions requires collaborative efforts and shared responsibility. Developed countries must take the lead in reducing their emissions and providing the needed support to developing nations. We also need to offer more support to developing countries. These countries face significant economic and institutional barriers when transitioning to low-carbon energy sources. Currently, 2.4 billion people lack access to clean cooking facilities, and 775 million people live without electricity, with women and children disproportionately affected. There is an opportunity to meet growing energy demand more efficiently and equitably by utilizing renewable energy, especially photovoltaics. Low and lower middle-income countries also require affordable finance options, as they already carry a heavy debt burden and receive inadequate clean energy investments. Currently, the costs of capital in these countries can be up to 7 times higher compared to the United States of America and Europe. This disparity hinders their ability to take ambitious steps towards mitigating climate change. Access to affordable finance is essential for increasing mitigation efforts in low and middle-income countries. The report also highlights that carbon dioxide removal will be critical. To achieve the long-term temperature goal of the Paris Agreement, carbon dioxide removal is essential. And the more we delay, the more carbon removal we'll need. There are not yet enough carbon removal options, so we need to do all we can to foster innovation and facilitate the scale-up of these technologies. Strong policy and financial support will be imperative during their formative phase. The next decade will be particularly critical for the development and maturation of these technologies. In conclusion, urgent and rigorous reductions in emissions are crucial to bridge the emissions gap and ensure the feasibility of achieving the long-term temperature goal of the Paris Agreement. To have any chance at a 1.5 degrees Celsius increase, we need to reduce emissions by 42% within the next 7 years, compared to the current trajectory under existing policies. The decisions and actions we take in the next few years will shape our future. Let us work together towards a sustainable and resilient planet.